Sawadee Krap and welcome to another episode here for the Fungal Pod, Mindful Media and Communication. And as you've seen from the thumbnail text that you clicked on to press before you press play at the title, the headline, you can see I'm already stumbling over my words because it's a very serious episode today, right? But I felt like we have to talk about it because not enough people, I think, talk about the coverage of like the Israel-Palestine conflict. Okay, so I understand that Israel-Palestine conflict it's a very controversial topic to talk about, and it's been a difficult topic for decades. And I'm not here to sum up a geopolitical crisis in like a 5 to 10 minute video, so I'm not trying to do that. But and I'm not trying to like just go like free Israel, free Palestine, or anything like that. So don't worry. But I'm trying to explore the role of the media in that ongoing conflict, because I think the media also plays like a huge role when it comes to how we, as people that are not in the region, understand the conflict, and probably even people within the region, how they understand the conflict. Okay, so I'm looking at the media, not shifting blame, not blaming anyone who's demonstrating right now, doing whatever. If you're violent, I blame you, but that's about it, okay? So, looking at the media, okay? So if we look at the media and just the power of media narratives as a whole, okay? There are several theories that we already discussed also before here on this podcast that we can look at and see, oh, that's how those theories are being used to paint a certain narrative. Okay, so for example, on previous episodes, we talked about the agenda setting theory, right? So the agenda setting theory tells us that media outlets decide what is newsworthy and what's not. So they set the agenda as to what they are showing. So for example, right, the media, of course, covers a lot of like missile launches, for example, because that's what gets the viewer like, oh my God, another missile. Oh, wow, look at those drone strikes and so on, right? But it doesn't or barely ever covers daily life struggles in the region, for example. We don't know, most of us don't know how daily life in Gaza is, for example, right? So that's part of the agenda setting theory, okay? Now, of course, this theory applies to every outlet, everyone who produces media. All the theories I mentioned now apply to everyone who produces media. So side A, side B, right? They show you what they want you to see, obviously, right? So if I'm pro-Israel, if I'm Israel, I will only show you how the rockets from Gaza hit Israel and innocent people die. If I'm Hamas, I will show the same thing, just from the other way, right? Okay, so that's the agenda setting theory. So every media outlet, everyone who produces media has an agenda, okay? And there's also like a second level agenda, for example. So how media focuses on specific attributes, for example, humanitarian issues right now, right? So for example, I'm German, as you know, so German media, now lots of them focus on the humanitarian issues, making like this like one of their main talking points. And I'm not saying that's not fair. Of course it's fair. It's very fair. It's a tragedy. So the humanitarian issues should be a focus, of course. But I'm just saying like that's now the agenda of lots of the media back home, that they are focusing more on the humanitarian issues rather than on other issues, while, for example, other outlets maybe focus on like meetings that happen in Dubai right now, for example. Okay. And the last part in the agenda setting theory concept is, of course, we also have gatekeeping, right? The editor of that outlet, whatever that might be, chooses what makes it to the front page, what makes it to their Instagram, and so on, of course, right? Or what makes it on the air. So again, like the agenda setting basically tells us that the media outlet that produces or publishes the media decides what the audience can consume and can see, and hence, of course, furthers their own agenda. And of course, those agendas are very different depending on the side that you're on. Okay? Which leads me to the second theory that I wanted to discuss that I noted down, which is the framing theory, right? So the framing theory basically is used to simplify complex situations. And I think we see this a lot right now. And then it leads, of course, to lots of stereotypes, okay? So, for example, media framing is like one side, for example, are the terrorists, and the others are, I don't know, the liberators. I'm just throwing it out right now, yeah? We've seen like terrorists right now being used a lot. And I don't even mean to just talk about, like, for example, Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, right? So they probably deserve that label terrorist. Even though if you look at it from Hamas' point of view, I'm gonna say that lots of people in the Hamas probably don't think of themselves as terrorists. But I mean, so they're labeled as a terrorist organization in most countries in the world, I believe. So fair, I guess. But there are other organizations that get also labeled in different ways, right? So that's like framing tries to simplify. Like they're all terrorists. They're all like this. They're all like that. Okay, so that's framing. And we see in that conflict, it's not that easy, it's not that simple. But framing theory tells us that media outlets, they try to simplify because then it's easier to group us into a yes or no. I'm pro this team against that team. This group is my group, that group I'm against. And then we click on stuff, we buy stuff, and so on. Okay, so that's why. There's also like episodic and thematic framing. So isolated incidents, for example, versus broader context. Okay, so if like one terrible thing happens, it's like, that's what they did, and always like that, even though it's just maybe like one terrible but one isolated incident. Yeah? And you say, that's always like this. So you take like one incident and frame it the way that you say, all of them let this happen, that's why they're all bad, for example. Okay. And one of my favorite theories in this regard, favorite is maybe the wrong word to say, but one theory that I think applies a lot is the theory of moral panics. Okay, moral panic theory. So moral panic theory talks about threats to societal values and interests. Okay, so if something seems like a threat to the society that you're part of, to what you think is right, and you're like, oh my God, this could happen to me, this could happen to my children, then we are scared, we are taking part in a moral panic, and we want it to be solved. So, for example, if we see footage or we hear about babies being killed, for example, all right, then we feel like, oh my God, this is against our moral compass. Those terrible people, they need to pay for it. Let's just go all in. Then later it might turn out that the story wasn't even true, but then we're already blinded, right? So again, just give you an example of the moral panic theory. Okay, so if something goes against our societal values and interests, against societal norms, mostly when children are involved, we'll be like, oh my God, which is understandable. Obviously, we want to protect our children, right? So then moral panic hits, and we are taking sides rather easily. That doesn't only apply like in this context right now, like generally speaking also, right? For example, if there's like, I know another school shooting, like let's say, because of course that happens all the time, unfortunately. So then we're easy to jump on like bandwagons, like, oh, she they played like this computer game, we should ban those computer games, for example. It's also moral panic. Okay, just to make that more clear. Okay. Then, of course, we also have media ownership, which of course steers the narrative as well, right? Media ownership and bias. So editorial policies, obviously, they reflect media ownership. Like, so who owns that outlet, right? Is it Rupert Murdoch or Sun now? Or like who steers it? Is it left-leaning? Is it right-leaning? That obviously influences what we see in the media, right? So, yeah, as I said, Murdoch-owned media, maybe Qatari-owned media, or like here in Thailand, we have lots of Chinese-owned media, for example. That then could lead to like the propaganda model that you probably all heard of, like based on ownership, funding, sourcing, ideology, and so on. And that all influences, of course, what kind of content we can consume from that publisher, from that channel, right? So that's all like part of the political economy of media, right? How media serves those capitalist interests. Because in the end, of course, those people running/owning, and that can be shareholders too, of course, but they all want to earn money with that company, be that the BBC, be that CNN, be that whatever. In the end, it's all like a business. And of course, they will pick the content that leads to the best business for them, right? That's just the case. And speaking of like picking content, right? Social media, obviously. Like, I mean, yeah, algorithms obviously contribute to polarization. And we just seen that in the EU again this past week, that actually the commissioner for the EU sent letters to TikTok, Meta, and who else? Who else is out there? X, of course, yeah. Also, so he sent letters to all of them. The most stern one, I think, to TikTok, saying they have to do something against all those fake news coming out of Israel and Palestine, because that obviously contributes to like a crazy amount of like influence in regards to what people, especially younger people, think about the conflict. Okay, so algorithms, of course, lead to polarization, because once you look into like pro-Israel content, you see more of it. You look into pro-Palestine content, you see more of that. You look into something like how terrible Israel is, you see more. How terrible Palestine is, you see more of that, right? So it, of course, leads to polarization, because we interact with extreme content, right? If it's just content that says like, hey, wait, let's look at both sides and I'm going to explain it for the next 20 minutes. No one's interacting with this. We want to be like, right? That's the content that works. So you can see right now the hashtags, right? The most trending hashtags probably are right now hashtag Free Palestine, hashtag Stand with Israel. Those are probably the most trending hashtags on social media right now, right? Because polarization works. And we are all in this filter bubble, as we know. And so, of course, you only see the content that you agree with, that you interact with, that you agree with the most, that you share, and then you will see more of it, right? That's kind of like gatekeeping, what we had earlier, but like in social networks. So network gatekeeping, if you want, the network gatekeeping theory. It's like how a piece of information, how the importance is determined. The more people share it, for example, the more important it must be. And in the social media, of course, it snowballs very, very quickly. So be aware when you're using social media, okay? Because it leads to the next part I wanted to discuss, the emotional engagement that we all have with content, and the spiral of silence theory, okay? When it comes to the spiral of silence, you see, it's quite sad to talk about this. So when it comes to this, right, so there are different theories that affect the spiral of silence, okay? So one would be the effect theory that we have in media studies, okay? So it tells us that emotional media, obviously, can cause very strong reactions. I mentioned it earlier with the moral panics when we talk about like babies, children, and so on. So that's why you always see children when it comes to like coverage of war and so on, which is fair. I mean, of course, they suffer the most. So yeah, obviously, but of course also because it has the biggest emotional connection to the audience, obviously. Also, you have those parasocial interactions, right? Emotional bonds with public figures. So if a public figure that we follow, that we like maybe even, speaks out about something, then we might lean towards believing what they believe in, right? So if, I know, someone that you have like a parasocial means like a one-way bond, you like them a lot, but they don't even know you exist, right? That's parasocial relationship in short. So they say, yeah, Free Palestine. You're like, yeah, exactly. So I'm now Free Palestine. If they say, no, I stand with Israel, you're like, yeah, exactly, I'm stand with Israel. So that's also part of the effect theory, those parasocial relationships, okay? There's, of course, also use and gratification theory that we discussed many a times here on the podcast, like that the media satisfies emotional needs, right? So whatever you are looking for, you will engage with more, and then hence the media, social media will show you more of that, okay? Now this all leads to that spiral of silence theory, okay? What does it mean? It means that minority views, they get suppressed. Why? Because, well, there's a fear of backlash that we have in real life and on social media, right? And this prevents the expression of unpopular opinion. So if, for example, just an example, right? All my friends that I, in real life, or maybe even online, right? All my Instagram feed is all full of like, I stand with Israel. Then I'm too afraid to say, yeah, however, have you looked into, And then, because then you're already like labeled as something terrible. And the same thing the other way around, right? If I say like free Palestine, and like, yeah, but have you not seen, I cannot say like, but guys, have you not seen what the Hamas did? No, then you're also labeled as someone who might say that the violence is justified, right? So it is a very sad, still very sad, but it's a very difficult topic to discuss, right? But you see how the media shapes views, and I hope you can see why there are so many extreme views on the topic. Okay, we also have the public sphere theory, and the public sphere is like the place, social media, for example, where opinions are formed. Right, used to be the yard or whatever, like the place where people just speak in a park, maybe even, right? But now it's like, of course, mostly social media, and of course, opinion leaders, they take a place in the public sphere to actually shape opinions, right? Because you're in this public sphere, social media, like so much information. Who do I listen to now? And then you listen to probably your peers, friends, and probably like opinion leaders that you follow anyways, right? So of course they influence the way we think. So that's why, of course, also then like media coming out of certain areas, A or B, try to work with those opinion leaders, obviously. And well, it's obvious, but I have to say, right, that the media amplifies anything that happens, right? And that's why media obviously can also magnify the conflict, right? So you see that there's breaking news, more bombs or more missiles launched towards Israel, more missiles shut down by the Iron Dome, and so on. And sometimes that's not even a case. I mean, yes, so we see the attacks, but I mean, the media just replays it over and over and over again, because that's the footage that's like the most engaging, right? The audience goes like, oh shit, but then maybe it's the footage from yesterday, for example, right? So it's a repetitive use of this crazy footage that's so engaging. You just keep using it so that we think, oh my God, they're never stopping, for example, right? So, or like just always like breaking news, more, right? So it amplifies it. It's terrible, yes, but the media benefits from amplifying it, because then it has more views, more clicks, more shares, and so on. Okay, this also goes hand in hand with the cultivation theory that we discussed many times here on the podcast as well. Like, because your perceptions of the world, they are based on what's in the media, right? So then the more the media shows you one thing, the more they hope to influence the way you see things, and then you see the things they want you, the way they want you to see it, and then they produce more content, you consume more of their content, okay? And there's another theory related to this. It's called the mean world syndrome. This means that we now view the world as more dangerous than it actually is, which then, again, connected to the moral panic that I said earlier. If you're in a panic, if you think like everything is terrible, everything is scary, then you're more likely to consume the media that agrees with that and say like, yes, the world's a scary place, and you should do this to protect yourself, you should do that to protect yourself, and so on. Okay, so that's also something that's unfortunately happening right now. And as last part of this section, right, is like the news value and the influence. Okay, so it's simply a fact that drama and conflict get more coverage than like anything happy, anything positive, right? For example, the peace negotiations right now, I don't think they get as much, or there's no peace negotiations, but the ceasefire, for example, doesn't get as much coverage as like when it starts again. And it's just, well, of course, because more time is spent on the war right now, of course, but it's also because the war sells, peace does not. And that's, I almost said the F word, that's just ridiculous, okay? I mean, it's understandable, but it's incredibly annoying. And this then goes hand in hand again with the framing, and because the news pick, of course, what gets them clicks. So the media logic tells us, well, we're gonna, as a media channel, we're gonna use the content that gets the most clicks, the most views, the most shares, and that's not peace, that's war. So the more war you get, that's so annoying. Yeah. So you see my transitions today are not great, but it's just like because it's just so annoying to just think about it. I have one more quick section I wanted to talk about. It's just the echo chamber, right? We all know it, but I just wanted to quickly mention it as well. The echo chamber and the consequences. Okay, so echo chamber is of course basically selective exposure. Okay, so what I said earlier, algorithms, they result in similar content. You interact with one kind of content, so you get more of it. Okay, so example, if you compare like Reddit, for example, like Reddit subreddit of Israel and a subreddit of Palestine. Okay, you interact with the Palestine one, you get more of this. You interact with the Israel one, you get more of that, right? And when it comes to what we actually also select, like selective exposure, right? What we select to consume, of course we're seeking confirmation with the information. We're looking, maybe not even actively, maybe actively, but maybe not even actively, but you see something that confirms your viewpoint, you're like, I knew it, and then it pops more into your eye, and you're like, yeah, see, I knew it. If there's something that doesn't agree with your viewpoint, you might not even recognize it, you just scroll past it, for example. Okay, that leads to that confirmation bias. Okay, we're prioritizing information that confirms beliefs rather than information that challenges beliefs. If we are critical thinkers, right, we shouldn't do that, because we should be happy to be challenged, to see, hey, does my belief actually stand a chance? Is it right? Or if it's too easy to be challenged, then maybe it's not. Maybe I have to rethink. But generally speaking, we don't embrace the challenge. We'd rather avoid the challenge, right? And we also have the cognitive dissonance theory here, which we talked about before as well, meaning psychological discomfort in conflicting information, right? So if we get information that conflicts with what we already think, we're like, nah, that's against my beliefs. That can't be true. I don't believe it. Okay, we distance ourselves. For example, like an Israeli citizen reading Palestinian narratives, for example, we're like, no, or the other way around, right? So again, not taking sides. And this leads to, again, this selective perception. We only perceive information, again, that aligns with our views. I know I'm repeating a few things now, but it's on purpose because it's just so important that we understand it, okay? And it also leads to not only selective perception, but also selective retention, meaning we only retain what aligns with our views. We might read something that's like not aligning with our views, and we're like, okay, I read it, whatever. And we just repeat, or we retain and then repeat and regurgitate what we actually believe in, okay? And again, that then combined with the global media influence that we had earlier, meaning that international media, of course, shapes what we see of the world and how we perceive the world. Yeah, for example, the United Nations reaction to like media reports, for example, like, hey, I follow the UN as an example on Instagram, and then the way they react to certain things that are happening, and like, oh, okay, well, if they say that, I'm going to believe that, right? There's also something that we call like the CNN effect. Again, media shaping the policy. So if it's enough talked about in the media, it will eventually be picked up by politicians, for example, and then involve or influence policy. Because, of course, politicians are also people that are being influenced by all those things that I just mentioned in the past 20 minutes. That's not just influencing you and me, that influences politicians as well, because they consume the media too. This might even be the scariest of all those things, right? If it influences us, okay, who are we, right? But it influences politicians, because politicians are people. If you believe it or not, they are people, and they can be influenced just like you and me. Okay. So then, of course, I mean, there's also soft power at play that's being used for like international influence here and there. But I think that's enough of like media studies right now. So I'm bringing it to an end in just a second. I just want to say, be aware of like biased reporting, obviously. Right, so for example, I know how media frames the stories that they're showing. So be aware of this. Be aware of like how semiotics, meaning the use of imagery, for example, and symbols in the media, labeling people as terrorists, for example, labeling people in certain ways, and just make sure that you like that you have critical media literacy. That's all. Like if you're consuming media, especially in such important times and with such important topics, just make sure that you're critical in regards to everything that you're seeing. That's just important. I don't say don't believe anything. I say be critical and just then come to a thoughtful conclusion. Okay, so I think media literacy is the most important thing here again. We got to be discerning and critical to make sure that we understand what's actually happening and don't just believe everything that we see. Okay, because media has a very pivotal role here in shaping the narrative. And it could be used for something positive, of course. But as we already now discussed the last 20 minutes, it barely ever is, because the media benefits from controversy, violence, war. Yes, there's no happy ending here for this podcast, for this episode. I just felt the need to talk about like how the media really benefits from us taking sides and being mad at each other and not coming together. Let me know what you think. Like, how do you have like a media channel that you believe? How do you consume the media? How do you make sure that you're not being baited into one or the other way? Let me know your thoughts. That's it. Follow for more. I can't even do the call to action here today because I'm so sad. But yeah, I hope we have like a discussion on that. And stay safe, take care, for real, and we talk soon. Sawadee Krap.